Oh, hello. Hi, how are you? I'm doing all right. Okay, folks, I am just answering a few questions in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and share screen. So we are all on the same page. Surprise, surprise. Do your seating chart, please. If you're remote, that is, you can navigate that for yourself as well. Okay, I just need to move this out of the way. Okay. All right, I'm getting this stuff figured out. I say that, and then some shit's gonna hit the fan today. My earlier class on Mondays, I have a 3-hour class, and there was 0 issues this entire semester, all 5 weeks so far. And today's Zoom would not work. Not for anything, not for nothing. I was like, what? What's going on here? So if you haven't done so already, make sure and get your seat assignment done and done. Let us know that you're here. I really like in sending out these polls. So I have 2 questions, I think, today. One being, where are you? Please let me know where you're at. This is just good to see how the space is being used. It's also, they asked me to pay attention to how many people are in their participation and how many of them are physically in class and on Zoom. And I figured if I just asked this question, I'd have that data for them anyway. I would have that data for them anyway. TAs are going to keep an eye on the waiting room. I'll go ahead and leave that poll open for a few and let people fill that out as they come in. I want to address some questions. We have topic questions, and then I have a few housekeeping items. First topical question, what are the differences between reinforcement and punishment? If something is reinforcing, that means the behavior increases, right? We're going to see that again. If something is a punishment, then that behavior decreases. So and here's one of the things that we didn't get to when we were talking about reinforcement and punishment last week. These are all person specific. What I find to be reinforcing is going to be different than what you find to be reinforcing. And what I find to be punishing might be different from what you find to be punishing. That's the reason why sometimes we run across individuals who we don't understand why they make the choice that they make, but in some way, the consequence or the outcome of their behavior is validating. It's reinforcing. It increases the likelihood of that behavior happening again. And so this is very individualistic, and it's really important that I highlight the difference there. So my friend Peter, he hates pedicures, but I love pedicures. Okay, I love them, right? At the end of the semester, I get a pedicure, I do the full one that has the paraffin wax and all that other great, delicious stuff. For him, it would be the 7th level of hell, right? So that would be a punishment for him, but reinforcing for me. All right, the main difference between reinforcement and punishment, reinforcement, no matter what it is, increases the likelihood of behavior. And punishment decreases the likelihood of behavior. We want to pay attention to that outcome on behavior. What is the difference between a stimulus and a condition? Boy, I'm not sure. A neutral stimulus, right, is something that isn't associated with the behavior, right? So remember with the dog, we had the salivation, the bell and the salivation. The salivation was the behavior and the stimulus was the bell. Well, it was neutral, right, related to salivation. So that's the reason why Pavlov did that little test to make sure that that bell didn't inspire salivation. That way he could see if learning was actually occurring. When something is conditioned, we are really looking at an association has been built, right? A response now occurs with a different stimulus. That's how we know learning's happened. That's when we know things are moving forward, which I think it taps into another question that we'll get to in a second. Can I provide an example of both negative and positive punishment? Positive punishment is when you add something adverse, and I'm making a spanking motion with my hand. That's when you add something that's adverse, okay? Negative punishment is when you remove something, okay? When you remove something that you liked, that you wanted. So when I take my daughter's phone away, that's a punishment. That's a negative punishment because I'm removing something that she wants. Now, if I were to give her a fine every time she had her cell phone out and she wasn't supposed to have it out, that would be me adding something to her environment that she doesn't like, that's adverse. She doesn't have cash flow, so I'm not entirely sure why I would try to fine her, but that's okay. 13. How do I differentiate classical and operant conditioning? Okay, classical conditioning is the association that we're talking about. That's when we talk about neutral, and that's when we talk about conditioned. Operant is just through schedules of reinforcement, through frequency of outcomes. Remember, B.F. Skinner really believed in the Thorndike principle or the Thorndike effect, in that every behavior had a consequence. everything has either a reinforcing or a punishing value to it. If you do that behavior again, it was reinforced. If you don't do that behavior again, then it was most likely punished, or you didn't, like, it was so neutral that you weren't inclined to go either way. Okay. Can all of the learning theories have disadvantages, such as observational learning? If a parent swears in front of a child, their child picks up the term and starts to say it. Would this be considered negative? I think that that would be problematic socially and maybe in the classroom. But when you think about your kid picking up the word shit, right? But your kid also picks up the word kindness, compassion, prayer, love, right? One curse word balanced out with all these other words that have been conditioned that the child has learned through experiencing and that associative learning. I think that I don't think learning theories can have disadvantages. I think that we can have people who pick up habits that make them more or less likely to function effectively in society. And again, that's our society. I mean, curse words in our culture today carry a very different weight than they used to, a much different weight than they used to. Okay. How do you know when a neutral stimulus has turned into a conditioned stimulus? It's when it elicits a response. Okay, a neutral stimulus has become a conditioned stimulus when it elicits a response. That's how you know the learning has occurred. When that entity has the response, absence of any reinforcement, absence of any pairing. So when the dog salivates in response to the bell, okay, that is when conditioning has occurred. Until the dog salivates with the bowl, conditioning has not occurred. That neutral stimulus has not become conditioned yet. Okay, and remember, anytime you want to build associations, and I'll tell you, parents use operant conditioning all the time, especially when it comes to like potty training kids and trying to get them to do specific other behaviors. You know, they do something good, you want to reward them. In our culture, we'd much prefer to talk about pets in this way, but we use schedules of reinforcement all the time. When you're first teaching and you're hoping that whatever's learning is learning, you have to give what we call a schedule of continuous reinforcement, which means that every single time that behavior is exhibited, it gets the treat. The treat is administered. The kudos are administered. Every single time that happens, okay? Continuous reinforcement. After that, right, it can become variable, and our textbook talks about variable ratio, interval ratio. Please make sure and read through those schedules of reinforcement. How does spontaneous recovery work? Well, spontaneous recovery works when you forget something, right? When you forget something or when you seemingly have unlearned something. And then all of a sudden, you're reminded about it. Anybody here ever have, anybody here ever have the tip of the tongue phenomenon? And you're like, oh God, I know what that is. I know that song. I know that rhythm. I've heard that before. What is it? What is it? What is it? What is it? Okay. Spontaneous recovery is when you walk away from that interaction or whatever it might be, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, that's what this is. Okay, that's spontaneous recovery from memory. Spontaneous recovery from learning is the example that I gave when I snowboard, right? First few runs of the season, every time I get off the chairlift, I'm pretty sure I'm going to eat shit. But eventually, I have that muscle memory kicks in, and that's there. All right, I wanted to take care of a few housekeeping items. Your week 5 summary this week. Remember that this week will be extra credit. We're not going to change any of the points on it. I have yet to talk to the TAs about changing the rubric. I'll be able to let you know on Wednesday if we're going to update the rubric at all. I don't want the TAs to expend an exhaustive amount of time on something that's extra credit. So we might be reallocating their time resources elsewhere rather than having them detailed grade the weekly summaries. The reason why the weekly summaries exist is, one, just to get you in the habit of repetition and pulling that information out of long-term memory and actually using it in your short-term/working memory, but also to get you feedback for essays. You guys are going to get your Unit 1 essay scores this week before the Unit 2 essays become active. And please go through your weekly summary feedback and also through your unit essay feedback. All of that is information that will inform and empower you for essays. I don't know what's happening to my mask. This was not an issue earlier. I think my headset's jacking me up. So I'm having to adjust a lot. Next bit of housekeeping. Unit 1 essay grading. I'm grading all those on my own. So, and they're worth quite a few points, and I am definitely doing my best to provide detailed feedback and a thorough review. You will, period, have, period, these, period, before, period, your next unit essay becomes active, okay? I am 1,000% committed to getting you that feedback so that you can kick ass on the Unit 2 essay. Use that feedback to empower yourself towards, yeah, getting the grade that you want. Exit ticket, date and time. And when you submit your JPEG or your PDF for your exit ticket, we have to see the date and time on your screenshot. It doesn't serve us. It doesn't serve us to have something that doesn't have the date and time on it. So please make sure that whenever you're screen capturing that you've got the date and time. So those of you who have been submitting from your phone, that's not going to work anymore. You need to submit from a desktop. Okay, desktop, laptop. If there's a way that you can figure out to do it on your phone, do it that way. Okay, but we need to see the date and time on your screenshot. One of the things that we've run into is that the number of students who say that they've done an exit survey in Blackboard is not matching the amount of participants on our survey. So we're just trying to create a layer of due diligence that will allow us to trust, but also verify. Any other questions? I'll walk over here and stand by the chat. And look for any comments or questions. Evan's question, on laptops, it would just say Monday, 3:30 p.m., for example. Is that fine? On my laptop, it has the date as well. So if you can have a date, that would be awesome. 11:59 p.m. is not counted as late. 11:59:01 p.m. is counted as late. So you need to submit by 11:59 p.m., not 11:59 and 01 seconds. Okay, it looks like Annie St. George provided a solution there. Okay. Could we get this week's essays prompt as soon as possible? Yeah, as soon as we finish our coursework for this unit, you will get it. It's available right now, but it's not available to you because we haven't finished all of the content. Unit essay prompt will be available at close of class on Wednesday. Okay, all right. All right, looks like we got a lot of questions answered. That feels nice and productive. We're talking about lifespan, right? Remember, I'm a developmental psychologist. This is the hardest lecture for me to write all semester long because I want to talk about all of the things, because all of the things are so badass and they are so cool and they are so fascinating and they are so going to help you for the rest of your life, okay? But I don't do that because talking about all the things would be exhausting for all of us. And if I want to teach that level of detail, I should teach a developmental class. I'm teaching a developmental class next spring, so I'll get that cup filled at that point. In our lifespan section, we have several learning objectives. At the end of this unit, students will be able to explain various developmental theories, so we'll talk about those today. At the end of this unit, students will be able to explore connections between positive psychology and their personal development. You'll have that opportunity on some of your assessments this week. At the end of this unit, students will be able to understand the difference between physical, cognitive, and social emotional development. That'll be what we talk about today as well. And at the end of this unit, students will be able to outline human development throughout the lifespan. We're not going to get through the whole lifespan just because we tend to focus the majority of our resources on child development adolescent development and emerging adulthood, which is where the majority of students in this class are currently. We will get into adulthood and we might get into aging, but typically we run out of time. We run out of time. And maybe it's because you're not there yet. It's so much easier to look reflectively on where you've been and sort of see the applications there. All right, surprise. I want you guys to break out. What I want you to do though is I want you to, when you break out, talk about what you did for your explorations, okay? What did you opt into for today? Did you opt into attachment, parenting, emerging adulthood, or personality? And then just discuss in your breakout room what you learned about that. And the intent here is because all of these provided something of a deep dive, if you will, provided a deep dive into a specific topic. So being able to share that level of specificity with your peers will empower them and help them understand what some of the additional nuance in those topics might be. All right, I'm going to go ahead and open up all rooms. And go ahead and join your room and head out there. Hannah, that's okay. You don't need to come off mute. I see you looking to turn it off. Will you write down the names of people that are not going into breakout rooms?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah, just write them down and send them to me, would you?
Mm-hmm.
All right. And you are unmuted, just FYI, in case you start to belch or something like that.
You never know.
Yeah, you never know.
I promise I went into the breakout room.
Gotcha.
Dario did too, so they were both in my group.
Well, I figured as much.
Yeah.
All right, I just sent a close all rooms note out. All right, it looks like we should all probably be back by now. These are my favorite topics, right? I'm an attachment researcher. I'm a parent. I'm a parent of an emerging adult, and I have a 13-year-old. So yeah, I'm dealing with personality disorders right now. That's what makes developmental psychology so fun, is that it's just, we've been there, done that, and we want to know better so we can do better. And so maybe as parents, we can do better for our kids. I know that as a parent and as a researcher, my understanding of the science has exponentially informed what I've done and what I haven't done as a parent. So my plug for you is that moving forward in your life, if there is ever a time where you have the chance to take a parenting class before you become a parent, whether it's like a community ed or a workshop, at the very least, even if they don't provide really great, accurate information, taking the time to actually think about those things is going to be more valuable than you can imagine. So definitely take the time to check that out. I had students in another class of mine take an attachment survey where they had to find out their attachment style, and they were none too comfy with that. And here's what I want to say about that. I show up on the insecure side. I show up on what they call avoidant attachment, which is somebody who is unlikely to form bonds, somebody who is, oh my gosh, avoidant people have some of the worst. We have some of the worst outcomes, I'll be honest with you. More likely to substance abuse, more likely to have early and promiscuous intercourse. Pretty much when we think about avoidant individuals, a lot of what contributed to their sort of interpretation of relating, because the entire theory of attachment is about saying that those early life experiences kind of lay out the super highway of expectations. Like, not only in my infancy and early childhood do I learn from how other people treat me how I should be treated, but I really start to internalize how those people respond. And the hard facts of it is that those neural superhighways, those emotional expectations, are kind of set by the time you are 2 years of age. And that's just surreal to me. And one of the things that we know about attachment longitudinally is that They followed people for 25 years. They assessed them using the strange situation when they were 18 months-ish of age, and then they assessed them again when they were adults, like 25-ish. And 74% of the people had the same attachment classification at 25 as they did when they were 18 months. And that still just blows my mind. That is how strong that is, that it could have that level of what we call concordance rate. Excuse me. For the 26% that did change, there was a group of them, a smaller group of them, that went from an insecure classification to a secure classification. And the catalyst for that change was most often therapy. Going into therapy, seeking psychological remediation, learning how to retrain your brain neurologically through behavioral patterning. The rest of them went from secure to insecure. And there were two life experiences that happened. Their parents either passed away, one of them, God forbid both of them, and the other one is the parents got a divorce. Now, there are critical periods for divorce where divorce has different consequences for individuals and their emotional relating. There are so many predictive things when it comes to the dissolution of marriage that, I don't know, it's too much to talk about today, but I am teaching a class on human relationships, and I'm looking forward to offering an intensive reflection on the impact of disillusionment and what it means to get out of a relationship versus just getting into one. We spend a lot of time, our culture, glorifying what it means to get into one, that getting out of them, we don't spend enough time really talking about that and honoring that. And what we know from stress and well-being research is that individuals experience the same amount of stress planning a wedding as they do planning a divorce. It's just culturally, the wedding is supposed to be positive, right? So you shouldn't have too much stress. And then becoming a parent shows to have just as much stress as losing a loved one. Not losing your child. Losing your child has a different impact, but to have a child and lose your parent, stress-wise, the equivalent is the same. And the ramifications on your life is the same. But again, our culture tends to focus on, well, you should be grateful. You have all of this, like we mourn some things. All of it is stress. All of it taxes us. All of it pulls resources from us. All of us, it requires coping on our part in order to be successful in them. So I think honoring all of those transitions in life, for whatever they bring, for whomever, I think is really important to well-being. And we will talk more about that in the weeks to come. So I wanted to bring up some big topics. Nature versus nurture. I'm still sitting at the computer because I'm going to start a poll here in a second. I'm going to go ahead and send out that poll. Launch polling. I want to know, which one do you think carries more weight? Nature or nurture? In many ways, this is me asking you the question, is it genetics or is it environment that impacts your behavior? Okay. We're not even showing 90% voting yet. Okay, there we are. Now we're at 90% voting. We still have 15 more students to vote. Well, I'll give you the punchline right now. 19% say nature, 81% are saying nurture, that it has to do with the environment more than genetics. And that was kind of a trick question. Honesty is the best policy, because in our science today, we say it's both. It used to be the case when I started in the field of psychology as an undergraduate, it used to be the case that you were either in nature or nurture, but you could never be in both. And today, as developmental psychologists especially, we know that it's a combination of the two. Because if we were to try to attribute your behavior and explain what you're doing and how you're thinking and how you're feeling, if we only try to explain that using your genetics, we're not going to tell the whole story. But conversely, if we only try to use your environment, your context, and everything else like that, and we ignore your genetics, we're still not going to tell the whole story. So when we talk about nature versus nurture, we can talk about genetic predispositions, right? Predispositions for certain personality traits, certain resiliencies, certain processes, okay? We're talking about having a predisposition when we talk about nature. Nurture, right, is what happens when we take that quality and we put it into this environment. And I think that that's wicked romantic, because let's say I have the DNA to be a concert pianist, but nobody ever puts a piano in my hand. What good does that DNA do? Okay. Now, can we force somebody to become a concert pianist who might not have the genetic predisposition for it? Maybe, right? With some practice and some due diligence, we might be able to do that. But what we look for and what we strive for, especially in our American culture, is this synchronicity, this magical ebb and flow for us between our deep internal competencies and our environment, right? Finding that sweet spot. In the science of flourishing and positive psychology, we talk about the phenomenon of flow, about what it means to be so into something, so on top of it, so excited about something, that you're literally in a state where you're disconnected from reality, you're totally honed in on it. And I'm not talking about the distraction of binge watching Netflix or gaming excessively. Now, there are some theorists that say that you can be in a state of flow in gaming, and I would advocate that that could be true. But I would also want to say that that state of mind also needs to be coupled with an awareness of how that degree of investment contributes or detracts from relationships. Because if you're gaming and if you're doing things like that because the rest of the real world is just too much for you, there's some amount of that that's coping and is completely appropriate. We call it distraction coping. But for the most part, what we see is it working to a negative degree. That real life is just too much, that the fantasy life is so much more comfortable. So nature versus nurture, is it genetics or is it the environment? And I'm here to tell you folks that when we talk in our science today, we talk about it being both, okay? Our genetic predisposition for social emotional development is our temperament, okay? That's our biology. Now, depending upon what kind of family we get into, how responsive our caregivers are, that is where the attachment comes from. You can have a really what we call difficult to soothe individual, like an infant, brand spanking new, that doesn't quiet easy, that's very irritable all the time. But if you pair that, right, if the universe pairs that infant with a responsive, appropriately responsive and engaged parent, that kid could be secure. Now, if we take that same temperament and we pair that infant with a parent who maybe has major depressive disorder or a substance abuse issue or might just be narcissistic, then what we run into is very negative outcomes. Okay? Very negative outcomes because that infant isn't being responded to in kind. Okay, very unique, and for me, as this being my area, a fantastical relationship. As a developmental psychologist, we talk about nature versus nurture. We also talk about staged versus continuous development. Now, stage development is the chrysalis, right? It's the monarch butterfly. It's the first we have this, then we have this, and then this leads to that, right? Stage development. Erikson, Kohlberg, Piaget, Freud, all of them are stage theorists. We also like to talk about, though, continuous, like the big, tall redwoods, that over time, just as with the natural passage of time and the allocation of resources, an individual would develop on this trajectory anyway. Most often we talk about physical development as being very continuous, right? Every day you're burning calories, you're building muscles, you're getting taller, you're creating neural connections, you have myelin happening in your brain, okay? That's very continuous. We could also break that up into stages like infant development, child development, and we really like to do that as developmental psychologists because it puts things in a cute little box. It allows it to be compartmentalized for us. Doesn't serve us as much as it could in longevity, right? Over a longer period of time. But there really is some value and some insight in that. All right, now I'm kind of, that was just sort of a debrief on bigger topics in development, or just some of the bigger questions that we typically ask. Now I want to take you into one of the earliest, biggest developmental environmental factors that we have. So this would be on the nurture side, right? Teratogens. These are chemicals, environmental exposure that can cause harm to fetuses. Now, I do spend time talking about this in Psych 101 because what we see in human development is that exposure to these teratogens during different periods of fetal development can actually have lifelong developmental outcomes. So if I'm going to talk about the impact in your life, this is as early as I can go, outside of whether or not your parents smoked pot or used drugs. Women only have one set of eggs their entire life, right? They're born with them. They're carried inside of their mother. So technically, I've carried my grandchildren if my daughters have anything biologically. Men get new sperm all the time, but chronic pot smoking, alcohol, other substance abuse, and even chemical exposures at places of employment can all impact the DNA of sperm. Unfortunately for women, right, we don't have this re-up cycle every 3-ish days. We have one set our whole life. So any chemicals that we get exposed to voluntarily or involuntarily, we could harm those cells, those embryonic cells, pardon me, not embryonic, those, the ovaries, the ovum. We can harm them and then subsequently have some of these effects. So let's say two fully healthy, completely fine, a sperm and an ovum come together, an egg come together. And then they're in utero. And in utero, we get exposed to a chemical. In the chat, if you guys would please go ahead and type what are some teratogens in our culture? Radiation, alcohol, yes. Heroin, vaping, alcohol, cigarettes, weed, drugs, nicotine, smoking, meth, cocaine, yes, yes, yes. Narcotics, pollution, crack, alcohol. How many of you has anybody here ever heard of what pregnant women shouldn't eat or do? What are some things that we say in our drink? Yeah, eat sushi, have coffee, cinnamon. Oh, I've never heard of that one. Mercury, yes. Cat litter, yes. Raw fish, red meat, like literally everything. So the reason why women in America are counseled to stay away from sushi, the Japanese women don't stop eating sushi. We just have such low quality seafood and we have such high mercury content. That's the reason why we don't. That's why we don't. Why we recommend not eating sushi. If you can get really high quality, no or low mercury seafood, then you can do that. Blue cheese, because of the fermentation process that cheese goes through, it has been told to be damaging to that. The other thing is that what we run into are things like don't dye your hair. One of the first things that your obstetrician is going to do when you tell them that you're pregnant is that they're going to want to know where you work and if you're around any chemicals. And that's all really important information because all of that helps us understand the exposure of the fetus to possible teratogens. Now, I'm going to show you this graph, and don't let it freak you out. I just love this shit. So the numbers across the top, the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, that's just weeks. So like you look like a fetus in 2 months. You know, I mean, you still have a tail, but for the most part, you look like a fetus. I mean, you go through a period of time where you look like a little lizard, and then a big lizard, and then an alien, and then you look like a baby. If you look in that first 2 columns, the week 1 and week 2, you'll see cellular division. That blastocyst is one of the things, that one of the reasons why a lot of women will think that they are not pregnant, because they'll have a period, and that's when the blastocyst is attaching to the uterine lining, and when it does that, it sloughs off some of those blood cells, so it can look like a really light period for some people, and that's why some women are like, I didn't know I was pregnant 2 months into it. But the blastocysts develop, the cells multiply. And if you look at the top part of week 2, you can see this is where the cellular division really happens. We have a placenta, we have a sac, and then we begin to develop the neural unit. I just find it just wicked fascinating. What I want to draw your attention to, most importantly, are the bars located underneath the different stages of fetal development. And these bars, the purple ones, these are highly sensitive periods. We talk about critical periods in development all the time. And these critical periods are periods of time where certain, again, in this example, chemical exposures or opportunities, if, you know, kids are not exposed to tactile things and oral things and visual things. These critical periods are periods of development where things need to be happening, okay? So in these critical periods, if you look across the very top line, you'll see neural tube deficits, mental retardation, and then you'll see CNS. That CNS at the end in the green is central nervous system. And it's pretty much the most vulnerable thing for the longest period of time. It is very vulnerable for a very long period of time. If you kind of look at it though, it looks like a lot of vulnerabilities go away between the 8th and the 9th week, or the 8th and the 10th week of fetal development. Students always ask me, well, you know, my friend, you know, got drunk on her wedding night and she was pregnant and she didn't know it and the baby turned out just fine. Yes, they do that, right? Some fetuses are more resilient than others, and this takes us to the nature, right? It takes us to that DNA. Some fetuses are more resilient than others, which means that they can have some chemical exposures. You can never assume what your fetus is. Heart, upper limbs, lower limbs, upper lip, ears, eyes, teeth, palate, and external genitalia. Typically, masculinization of female genitalia up until the 8th week, a male and a female fetus looks the exact same. That's one of the hypotheses now that suggests that why men have nipples, you know, because fetally we're all the same. Like, and fetally we really are the same. And it isn't until the 8th week of fetal development when a gene, the SRY gene we call that, says be a boy. And then the message gets sent, and then what was going to be a cervix and what was going to be ovaries turns into the head of a penis. Pardon me, the clitoris turns into the head of the penis, the same amount of nerve endings in the head of a male penis as in the female clitoris. And surprisingly, a lot of people think the clitoris is a very small entity, and it's actually a massive bundle of nerves that has about the same number of nerve endings as the head of a penis. Testicles, ovaries, all of those resources, all of that genetic material, all those proteins, all those acids are already there. And once that gene says be a boy, then that's when things start to change. The masculinization of female genitalia, you can see that that's happening around the 7th and 8th. That's when some of that is confusing, and the teratogens activate something, but obviously don't activate something completely. I highly recommend taking a class on identity, sexual identity. The reason being is that, and one of the reasons why so many people in our culture are moving away from, you know, two sexes, a bimodal sex, is because we can have people who have secondary sex characteristics or primary sex characteristics like genitalia and breasts and things like that that represent one gender, while hormonally, testosterone, estrogen, neurologically, they could actually be of a different gender. And so we're learning a lot in fetal science. I would say probably one of the most groundbreaking things in fetal science is around the, I want to say, 5th month of in utero. They're starting to see some science that says that certain levels of testosterone exposures or lack thereof for male fetuses can result in more effeminate males. Not gay, but just more effeminate males. So I think that when we look at the science of development, I think this is where we're headed, looking at the impact of this very powerful fetal development. All right.
We had a couple questions. I don't know
Happy
if
to
you
take them.
wanted.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Hannah.
Yeah. There are a couple people, or there was a little discussion going on about intersex individuals and that development. There were just a couple people who I think hadn't heard of that or were curious about that. I don't know if that's something you know a ton about.
Well, I mean, that's what I was just talking about, was the differences in hormones and the differences in genitalia, and how sometimes genetically an individual could have both sex organs, both typically a smaller than average penis, and normally that would be elongated clitoris, and still have a vaginal canal, and might even have an external testes. I mean, there are so many variations on the theme. Some of those things happen through genetics. Some of those things happen through teratogens. You know, if we're going to stick with the philosophy or the philosophy of evolutionary psychology, right? I mean, there would be a rationale for why that would be happening genetically. There are so many variations, you guys. It's so hard for us to say option A, option B now. We just know too much in the science. Yeah, it's really changed. Did you have another question, Hannah?
I don't think we had any others, just a little discussion.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's great. That's a wonderful, wonderful question. Yeah, we're gonna get to the family guy here in just a second. This is me trying to like keep it short in the developmental content. I really sucked at it. I'm talking a lot more than I normally do. I normally give you guys a few more opportunities to break out and talk, but I guess maybe I just want to be heard today. We're going to talk about biological development, everything from what you guys just saw in the fetal development, all the way up into death and deterioration. We typically focus our resources biologically on infancy, childhood, and adolescence. Adulthood aging has actually something that when I was going through my master's program in the 1999, my God, 1999, 2000, when I was in my master's program, I was taking classes in aging because I was studying to be a developmental psychologist, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to focus on gerontological research. Well, what I was told then, and it has been borne out now, right? This was 10 plus years ago, that gerontological science is one of the fastest, most profitable growing areas that we have out there. And the reason being is the boomers. Why? Because they're there, right? We have such a large population of individuals, the largest one we've ever had, obviously. And we have these individuals who are really working hard in life, and they want to reap the benefits. They want to understand how to live longer. What does that quality of life look like? And all of that has spurred on quite a bit of gerontological research that we've done. The biological is pretty simple. And this is part of that continuous theories in developmental psychology that I was talking about, where with the passage of time and the offering of nutrients, much like a plant, this is what would happen. Your cells would grow, divide, grow, and then eventually you reach a point where they begin to slow down in growth and then actually begin to deteriorate. And that's where we have death. That is where we have death. Simple as that. I divided this into the 3 main areas of development: biological, cognitive, and social emotional. I say social emotional for last because that's my favorite. Cognitive development, we have Piaget, okay? Piaget, French researcher. We still talk about his stuff today, even though empirically it's not really validated, but because he, put it into a cute little theory, we use it to organize our thoughts pretty frequently. So in organizing our thoughts about cognitive development throughout the lifespan, Piaget provided us with an early framework, right? An early way to get that started. Now, we have lots of criticisms of Piaget. Our first criticism is that Piaget based his entire theory on observations that he made of his own kids. Do you guys think I have an objective view of my daughters? No, they're miraculous, they're brilliant, they're fabulous, right? There's nobody better than her. Look at how smart she is. Look at what she did, and that's not reality, folks. That is not reality. So the first thing that Piaget gets is that he's really focused on looking at this, and he's not as objective as he was as a person, right? You're not going to see your kids the same way that you would see somebody else. So that was one of our first criticisms of Piaget. Our other criticism of Piaget was that he said that once you got done with something, you were done, okay? And anybody who has tried to learn a language after the age of 5 years of age, right? A lot of us struggle, but we pick it up fairly quickly. Okay, but Piaget said that you can't go back, and explore new things and develop new understandings of stuff. That's our other big criticism of Piaget. Now, Piaget had several stages of development. Remember, biology is continuous, but our cognitive development is going to be cognitive, moral, and social emotional, and personality development are all stage related. Sensory motor is that infancy. It's all about learning how my body moves, learning how I can control those extremities. Gross motor, fine motor, sensory motor. And it's sensory because, if any of you have ever seen a tiny, they get something in their hand and it goes straight to their mouth, right? Not only is that an evolutionary resource, right, to be able to feed myself, but that's how as infants, they try to understand the world. They put it in their mouth. They get the shape of it, they get the taste of it, they get the understanding of it in there. I did sign language, not baby sign. Baby sign is the baby makes up the word and you use it. I used American Sign Language with my daughter when she was an infant. And the first sentence I ever used with her was, "Please take that rock out of your mouth." It worked. She got it, she totally got it. And, but that's that sensory motor, right? Understanding how I can be an active agent in this space. And normally that's about birth to 1.5 years, okay, maybe 2 years, birth to 1.5 years, 2 years. And then we roll into pre-operational. Pre-operational, I'm starting to understand how things work. I might be outside of just trying to experience my environment through what I can taste, touch, smell, and feel. And that development is really important. And that development is typically marked by what we call object permanence. And Piaget set up his theory that said, okay, once you finished sensory motor, then this happened. Once you finished sensory pre-operational stage, then this happened. Okay, and actually, object permanence is the bridge between sensory motor and pre-operational development. And I'm going to show you guys this cute little video.
Well, this is a bigger surprise than that time Peter vanished into thin air.
Hey, Stewie, peekaboo!
Yes, I see you, fat man.
Where's Daddy?
What? Where did you go? Oh, this is impossible. Well, I can hear you, but I can't see. Really must really be gone.
Peekaboo!
Ah! How the hell did you do that? Look, I thought you disappeared, otherwise I wouldn't have picked my... Oh, great, leave when I'm right in the middle of a sentence.
So what Stewie's showing us there is this idea of object permanence, where if for that infant sensorily, right, if I can no longer see it, then it doesn't exist. That's one of the reasons why infants struggle so much when their parents leave, is that my parent is no longer in this physical space. My parent has abandoned me. They don't have the cognitive complexity to think about abandonment, but they no longer find things familiar. And that's that first touch. And so we know that we're bridging from sensory motor into this pre-operational stage once the peekaboo doesn't work anymore, okay? Just one of your favorite games to play them, because they think that when they can't see your eyes, you're gone. You've totally disappeared. And Stewie does a great job of modeling that for us. Now, the bridge from pre-operational to concrete operational is what we call conservation tasks. Now, conservation tasks are cognitive hurdles that allow, that are surmounted when kids can cross metrics, right? Cross the metrics of volume and height. So one of our most frequently used concrete operational tasks is you fill up 2 flasks of water, and they're the exact same shape, right? They're 2 tall beakers of water. And then you have a third beaker that's really wide and short. And then you pour one of those 2 tall beakers into the shorter beaker. And the fluid spreads out, right? So it's not as vertically high, still the same volume, right? Still the same amount of liquid. But the line, right, relative to the table has actually changed. And so when you ask kids which one of these 2 has more, they're going to say the one that has the taller line, even though no water has spilled out. Okay? Another thing that they would do is they would line up 2 rows of quarters, 5 quarters each. And they would first test the kid to say, are these lines equal, these rows of quarters? And they'll be like, oh yeah, they're equal. And then all they do is they spread out one of those rows of quarters. And then they say to the kid, are they equal now? And they said, no, this one, there's more in this one. And that is an amount versus length conversion. And so this concrete operations, they are operating concretely, like in one way, okay? What we're working on, the big cognitive task here, is to be flexible, to be able to say, it's still the same amount of quarters. This one is now taking up more surface area. It's still the same amount of water. This one's just, you know, longer and taller because it's in this vessel versus this other one. The last one that Piaget talks about is formal operations, which generally starts around 11 years of age, or according to Piaget. Science today says that formal operations might actually start quite a bit earlier than 11 years of age. But he really views formal operations as being like the last cognitive hurdle. Like, that's it. Now you just get better at what you do and you are in cognitive maturity. Well, that doesn't work. Right? That doesn't work. A lot of people, in fact, if I were to give this assessment to every single student in my class today, research suggests that 70% of you would not test out at formal operations given Piaget's definition. And that's a lot. So we're still working on understanding those cognitive aspects, right? Understanding Piaget and the impacts there. One of the things that I've been really excited about lately, and I've dived into quite a bit, is this idea of meaning making, and that at this stage in your life specifically, one of your cognitive tasks that's keeping you growing is working on meaning making, taking in the world and deciding how the world impacts you and whether or not you want to actually evolve from that. That's an assimilation and accommodation, which is also part of Piaget. But the cognitive task that you all are working on now is meaning making, right? Every time you hear a political ideology, every time you hear a fact of science, every time you hear somebody retell a story of relationships, you are trying that on. You are saying, is this something that's a part of me? Is this something that contributes to me? Is this something that I want to incorporate? Now, you're not really doing that consciously. You might be if you're studying something. But for the most part, you're not really doing that consciously. That's all happening behind the scenes. All right, the last one is social emotional development. Erik Erikson. Now, what I would love for you to do is, if you need to, you can go ahead and open up your textbook. This is just from our textbook. It's table 9.1. I'm going to send you guys out into discussion groups, and what I want you to do is I want you to talk about and figure out which stage of development you're in as far as Erik Erikson goes. Please do not confine yourself, right, or limit yourself to this discussion only based upon age. I'll tell you, this is one of our criticisms of Erikson. He said that everything was a crisis and that once you resolve the crisis, you were done. You could move on. Well, we revisit these things all the time. Trust versus mistrust, that most aligns with attachment, but that happens in adult relationships too, okay? So do yourself a favor, right? Kind of try to ignore those ages and just look at the descriptors of these different stages of social emotional development. Boy, we are already not short on time, but we're getting there. So I'm going to give you guys 5 minutes to talk about this, and then we can come back in. Okay, remember, pull up table 9.1 for yourself. All right, for those of you just coming back in, here's an opportunity for you to just share what you kind of came to and discussing with your peers, the different stages of development. Awesome. It's so good to see everybody all over the map. I don't see anybody in initiative versus guilt. I am shocked that some of y'all aren't in that one that have logged in so far. Initiative versus guilt is all about the feedback, right? Feedback from others. Like, are my efforts rewarded? Am I seen and heard? Like, am I able to produce? Yeah, is my initiative, is my expressions of self, are they reinforced in my environment? Well, sounds like you guys had some good chats already, you guys. Thank you. Oh, well, there we go. Thank you all so very much. We'll see you folks on Wednesday. You are definitely in the rhythm of getting things ready for Wednesday's class, so I'm not too worried about those details. I wish you all a very wonderful afternoon and go forth and make good choices.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Hi, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Bye, Neil. Awesome. So is it just TAs here? No, we still got lots of other people. Boy, was there a massive breakdown in the chat or what? Oh my gosh.
I was getting very irritated.
We'll talk about that. I think I have it set up now to where they can only communicate with me. So Delaney, will you hop on your chat and see if you can chat with anybody else?
It just says Kimberly Henderson privately.
Yeah, so now they'll only be able to send something to me now. I'm going to play with that because I love that you guys are able to address questions. And Lucas, I was able to see just briefly you addressing some.
I was worried if I didn't, something was going to go wrong. It's
No, I appreciate it. And I really think that your ability to reframe it as research was very respectful. And I appreciate you very much. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. I saw that. Yeah. Thanks. Bye.